Hello friends, welcome to the channel. In the previous video we discussed about the public and private subnet in detail, and we also discussed how they are different from each other. We set up the complete virtual private cloud with two subnets manually, but this time we are going to see another option that is a shortcut for the complete setup, and we can set up the complete VPC, that is virtual private cloud, with the multiple availability zone and multiple subnets in one go, or we can say in one click. Here we will be implementing one VPC with the name project-VPC. You can also name it in any other way, and we are going to work with two availability zone, and every availability zone is going to have two subnets. Out of them, one is public and other one is private. So here we are naming it as public 1 for first region and public 2 for the second region, and similarly the private subnets are named as private 1 and private 2. Here you must note that these are default names with the VPC and more setting, and we can always customize these default settings. Next thing is, here automatically it will also create one root table that is common for both public subnets and two different and independent root tables for the private subnets. So here the private subnets are going to have their own root table, but public subnets are going to share the same root table, and it will also update the root table for the desired route for the gateway. It will automatically make the public subnet changes in the root table, so we need not to do anything. And next thing, you can anytime customize these default settings. So let's start. Here is my AWS console. So go to VPC. Click on create VPC, and this time we are not going to choose VPC only, we will be selecting VPC and more, and the name is auto generated as project. You can also rename it, and the CIDR block range is 10.0.0.0/16. and next, here we have the option to select the number of availability zone you want to work with, number of public subnets, and number of private subnet. You can always customize it, but we are going with the default settings with two availability zones, and we are going to create two public subnets, one for each availability zone and two private subnets. And next setting is to select the NAT gateway that is required for communication with a private subnet. In this video we are not going to use the NAT gateway, so we are going to select none, and VPC endpoints are also we are selecting none. Next we just need to click on create VPC, and it will automatically create the complete setup as shown in the resource map here. Here you can see the complete setup. VPC will be project VPC, and it will be having two regions, US East 1A and 1B, and two subnets per region with the name as project subnet public 1, private 1, and for the second region we are going to have public 2 and private 2. And here comes the root tables, and root tables are common for the public subnet. If you can see, one root table will be linked with both of the public subnets, and the private subnets are going to have their independent root tables, private 1 and private 2 root tables. Next thing you need to note over here is, the public root table will be connected with the internet gateway as we had done manually in the previous video. So here the whole setup will be created automatically, and all the required settings and routes will be added automatically. So we just need to select VPC and more, and you can always edit other details. So here let's just try to edit the number of zones as 3. The complete setup will be changed like this. So here we will be having 3 availability zones with 2 subnets in each region, and the public subnet will be sharing the same root table. But for this session we are going to use only 2 availability zone, but you can also try with 3 availability zone. So this will create your complete setup like this: VPC with 2 availability zones and 2 subnets in each availability zone, and the public root table is connected with the internet gateway, and the private root tables are not connected with the internet gateway. They might be connected with the NAT gateway, but we are not covering NAT gateway in this video. So let's just create the VPC, and by clicking on create VPC, it will automatically create the complete setup for us. As you can see, it is turning green. So the complete setup is done, and you have the option to view VPC. After you clicked on view VPC, it will show the complete details and the resource map. If you select your VPC, you can easily view the resource map of your VPC like we did in the previous video as well. But that time we manually created the complete network, but this time we have used the VPC and more option. So here you can notice a slight difference as we are getting 4 root tables. Don't get confused. One of the root table, this is the default root table of the VPC that is created automatically along with the VPC, as we discussed earlier as well. So this root table is not associated with any of the subnet. Here rest of the settings are same as we discussed. The public subnet is connected with the public root table, and the private subnets are connected with the individual private root table, and only the public root table is connected with the gateway. So this is our complete resource map of the VPC. Now next, let's check the subnets and root tables individually. So here click on subnets. Here I am listed with all the subnets of default VPC and the VPC that we had just created. So just to see the resources linked with my VPC, I just need to create a filter here for the project VPC, and once we selected the VPC ID, all the resources related with our VPC will be listed here. And here are the 4 subnets that we had just created, and they are associated with the public and private root table. So let's check the root tables now. Here we have the root table as public root table. It is associated with 2 subnets as you can see, and subnet associations are listed here. Public subnet 1 and public subnet 2 are associated with your public root table. And let's check the other root table. So private 2 root table is associated with the private 2 subnet, and the private 1 root table is associated with the private 1 subnet. Now let's check the gateway root in the public root table, whether it is created or not. Just select your public root table and you can check the roots here, edit roots. As you can see, the first root is the default root, and it is common for all the root tables, means whether it is public or private. But here the second root, internet gateway, is only required for the public root table, and it is added automatically for this setup. So just cancel this as we are not making any changes. So the complete setup is done automatically and we need not to make any changes. You can simply launch the instances for the public and private subnet. So let's start. Go to EC2 dashboard. Launch instance. And give a name as public 1 EC2. Select the key pair. Now this time we need to edit the network settings as we want to launch the instance in our own VPC. So select the project VPC, and subnet we are going to select as public 1. Auto assign public IP should be enabled so that you can connect with your instance. Next, the security group will be created with the name launch wizard 1, and this time it is allowing for the SSH traffic from anywhere. And next, just launch your instance. It will be launched in public subnet. So go to instances. Here the public 1 instance is launched in the public 1 subnet of US East 1A availability zone. So let's check the details. Here you can check the subnet as public 1 US East 1A. Let's launch another instance for the private subnet of the first availability zone. Private 1 EC2, because we are going to launch it for the first availability zone, and rest I am keeping the default settings. Just select the key pair and edit the network setting. This time select your own project VPC, but the subnet is going to be private 1. This time I am going to use the private 1. Auto sign public IP enable. Security group will be created with the same SSH rule. So no change, and launch your instance. Go to instances. Now we are having two instances. One is running in the public and another in the private subnet of first availability zone. So let's launch one more instance in the public subnet of the other availability zone. This time we are naming it as public 2, as we are going to launch it for the second availability zone, that is US East 1B. Rest I am keeping the default setting. Select your own VPC, and this time I am going to select the public 2 subnet. Security group will be created with SSH rule, and launch instance. Go to instances. Now we have 3 instances running in 3 different subnets. So let's launch the 4th instance. This time we are naming it as private 2 EC2, as it will be launched in the private subnet of the second availability zone, Amazon Linux. Key pair, edit network settings, project VPC, and this time subnet will be private 2. And launch your instance. Go to instances. This time we are having one instance running in each of the subnet for 2 availability zones. So now we have launched one EC2 instance in each of the subnet for 2 availability zones. Now next important thing is, out of these 4 EC2 instances, only 2 will be accessible, as they are launched in the public subnet and they are connected to the public route table that is communicating with the internet gateway. So we will be able to connect to this instance and this instance only, but all the instances launched in the private subnets are not accessible. So let's try. So we will try to connect to the public subnet of the first availability zone and the private subnet of the second availability zone. So let's select our first public instance and try to connect with it. Here the connection is established successfully. So let's try to connect with one of the private instance of the second availability zone. So now let's try to connect with one of the private instance of the second availability zone. So here we are getting the error message, as we are trying to connect with the instance launched in the private subnet, but we were able to connect with the public instance or the instance launched in the public subnet. So this is the complete scenario behind the public and private subnet. So that's it for this video. You can try VPC and more option to launch your own VPC with different number of availability zones and different number of subnets. Bye and take care. Happy learning.